So I just briefly touched on this idea of determining the time, saying, when we're brainstorming and we're estimating what the time it's going to take us. Well, of course, there are multiple factors that can influence how long something's going to take us in a project. Things such as, the different skill levels of the team, whether they've done anything like this before, whether there's a gap in competency, how long it'll take them to bridge that gap, how long before they're fully productive, do we have the equipment required, do we have the tools available, is there lag time in transitioning those tools from point A to point B, is there a protocol or process to be able to get these resources? So, for example, is it going to be over an X amount of dollars and we've got to undertake one procurement process or another one? Are there contingencies involved that need to be taken into account, such as reliability of suppliers, and the motivation of the team themselves, so individual or team motivation. So how does the team feel about this? What part of the project cycle is it going to be on in terms of, if it's at the start, people might be really keen and motivated. If it's towards the end, people might be dragging their feet. All these factors, plus many more, can have a significant influence in terms of how long something is going to take us to complete. However, there are a number of tools that we can use to help us to determine what the time is going to be. So we can estimate timing. So the most common way in projects, because a project in theory is something that we don't necessarily have a lot of heritage in, it's not business as usual. So there is a large degree of estimating, even if someone has had experience in something similar. Every situation is a little bit different. So estimation is a big part of how we go about determining how much time something's going to take. And there's three most common ways of doing this is through the analogous process. The analogous process is to actually look at the time something similar took, and then using that as a basis to massage to our situation. So someone built a web application, very similar capabilities, very similar context, and it took them X amount of time for each of these steps. Some of those steps are going to be a little bit more complicated for us, so we're going to take those factors into consideration. Some are going to be a little bit more straightforward, so we'll take those factors into consideration. But using that as a baseline, this is what we estimate. The second one is a parametric. This is where we can use productivity rates, historical productivity rates, and then use that as a basis in which to forecast or estimate time going forward. So imagine that we're going to build 100 meters of a particular wall. It's going to be a brick wall, and it's going to be yay high and yay wide. But we don't know how long it's going to take us to build 100 meters of it. So we might build 1 meter, time it, use that data, multiply it by 100 and maybe put in a little bit of buffer. And we'll use that as a basis in which to determine, using that parametric system to determine the time that we think it's going to take us to build 100 meters of this wall. Then the other one is a 3-point approach, and a 3-point approach is really using the methodology, and this comes from the PERT methodology of scheduling, where we look at the most likely time, the most optimistic time, and the most pessimistic time, and we determine a time estimate based off those three things. So we take 1 times the most pessimistic, and then we add 4 times the most likely, and then we add 1 times the most optimistic. So 1 times the most pessimistic, 4 times the most likely, 1 times the most optimistic, and we divide that figure by 6, and then that gives us a numerical figure in terms of what our time estimate is. And this is actually quite a rigorous approach, and when I joked about building submarines earlier, but if you're working on a submarine project, building a submarine building project, I would be very confident that this would be the methodology that's being used to determine the time. Um, so if we look at those three, the analogous, the parametric, and the 3-point approach, it actually goes from least accurate to the most accurate. So the 3-point is the most accurate, and the analogous is the least accurate. But of course, there are other ways as well to determine time. So historical evidence, as I mentioned earlier, we can look at past projects in the organisation to get a better understanding of how projects flow within our context and culture. But we can also look at past projects in other similar organisations and use that as data to inform us in terms of determining time for our project. We can also seek professional advice. So industry bodies, publications or consultants that specialize in certain areas can also provide some invaluable advice in terms of how long something's going to take.